So Patrick comes to us with 24 years of Army experience. He has led soldiers in the Army Medical Department most of his career, been all around the world to include Bosnia, Iraq, Germany. Was a professor of military science at Georgetown University, and now doing his Army fellowship here for the past year. He is slated to take command of the U.S. Army Public Health Command Region Atlantic, which is basically all states east of the Mississippi, to include Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Honduras as well. He volunteers as a hunting and trail guide with nonprofit organizations that support wounded warriors. And his wife, Colonel Michelle Donahue, is currently stationed in Germany and will be until the summer of 2019, and they have 2 children. So basically, Colonel Donahue has been here going to school while his kids are going to school as a geo-bachelor in the DC area. Oh, and he's also a DC native. I don't think I've ever actually met one. So, Patrick.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. We can probably go straight to the question slide since Dr. Puma covered the but thank you very much for entertaining this, hopefully 45 minutes or so. Depending on how quickly my heart starts beating and I start rattling off words. But I do appreciate the opportunity, and as Dr. Puma mentioned, I am an Army War College Fellow, and it's been a very, very enjoyable year to kind of take a knee and to breathe, because my pace is about to pick up when I take command on 7 June. To include just traveling, it's just a very, very fast-paced environment that I'm looking forward to getting back into. I was talking to Jen earlier. I'm looking forward to having people around and just being a part of it, instead of being the old dude that sits in the back of the classes and watch all of you guys on Facebook or Instagram and not listening to Dr. Gray or anything. Okay, typical military disclaimer. Dr. Puma mentioned that I am a colonel in the United States Army. However, I am presenting this as Patrick Donahue, and that's why I chose not to wear a uniform. It's because some of the items within the paper that I finished about a month ago, and then the presentation here today, maybe it's slightly controversial, maybe slightly political, but that is what we are charged to do while at Army War College, is to define things, challenge items, challenge policies, and see where it may take us into the future. So typical Army policy, so what you see is from Patrick Donahue, not Colonel Patrick Donahue, over the next 20, 30 minutes. So the agenda. I'll let you read it on the left. We'll talk about some of the policies, past and present, very quickly. Talk about something that's fairly new to the military, and it's called the Army operating concept, and then what we deal with in a complex operating environment. The real question that I want everybody to look at is, does climate change cause conflict? And we're not going to get into the depth of this, and I'll steal a line from Dr. LaPuma. You know, we're about 100 feet wide and about 1 inch thick. So I'm going to hit some wave tops and challenge your brain process to start thinking after this. And as you think about environmental factors, climate change, how does that impact here, homeland in the United States, or abroad, as we have soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that might be in conflict, and it's something that they too should be thinking about as well. Okay, I will quickly go through this since Dr. LaPuma stole most of it. So, 24 years active duty service. I am an environmental science and engineering officer by trade, environmental protection undergrad and environmental management master's degree. My first duty assignment was climbing smokestacks and doing point source air pollution sampling at Aberdeen Proving Ground. That was probably the last really, truly technical job I held within the Army Public Health Command. I did my executive officer time out at Fort Lewis, Washington, as the Chief of Environmental Health Engineering Division and the Chief of Industrial Hygiene Division, which is close to Dr. LaPuma's heart. But I had some very, very, very smart people that worked for me. All I had to do was manage their missions, their operations, and challenge them to move forward on what was provided for them. So I do have some operational experience and institutional experience. Acronyms, I know, you don't know them, but I'm going to explain them. I just only have a certain amount of space. OTSG and headquarters. OTSG is Office of the Surgeon General, and then HQDA, I worked in the Pentagon 3 times now. So I've had the experience and the blessing and or curse. When 2 military officers say that they want to come to DC, it's like latch on and the Army sends you back to DC to be in the Pentagon. So my wife and I have truly benefited from our experiences there. I was a professor military at Georgetown, just down the road prior to coming here, and I had the blessing of teaching our next generation of future leaders out of the Hoya Battalion. But we also had cadets from GW, American, and Catholic as well as part of the Hoya Battalion. I've got 2 great kids, and I've got 1 very, very dumb dog. He's 70 pounds of pure stupid. That's all I have, and that's in my block. So, Army War College, it's a broadening assignment. They challenge us to think critically, creatively, evaluate theories, and then also theories of war and then national security policy and strategy. And that's where I want, and I'll get into this over the next couple slides, why I wanted to bring this topic in. One, I think I needed to do justice to the program as being part of Department of VOH here, but then also because it literally just happened, and I'll explain in a few minutes, about climate change in the military and our national security strategy. It is a requirement before I take command this summer, so that was part of the Army War College experience there. Now the academic requirement, we have to pick a topic from this key strategic issues list. It's called the KISSL. And basically it is a broad spectrum of topics that the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Milley, asks the War College Fellows to pick something that relates, challenge it, make it an argumentative or a position type paper and or project. It does not have to be research. So we do have some out there that are actually crunching numbers and data. They're doing either medical stuff or op tempo of soldiers and sailors and how many times that there's away from home or at home. A series of different types of opportunities out there. But it does not have to be a research. Most importantly, it has to be a national strategy importance. And like any good soldier, Dr. Lupuma said I had to be here today, so that's why I'm here today. So up in the upper right-hand corner, what I would like you to think about when you leave here today is climate change. And is it truly of national importance? Only 2 quick years ago, President Obama made this statement. And I believe strongly and firmly as an environmental science and engineer officer, but also as an Army officer, that it does hold national and global security implications. And we as a military must consider it. And that's where we're struggling at right now. Because just recently, December of 2017, it was stripped. And I'll explain that. I'm not here to debate climate change. So I think everybody in the room understands climate change, how we got here, what impacts they have. But what I am asking you to do, I am here, is to talk about the Department of Defense and the war on climate change and how climate change will impact our military operations homeland, and we call that CONUS, Continental United States, or OCONUS, outside the Continental United States. So briefly, and again, very, very thin wave tops, but I want you to think about it, and these documents can be found online. They're not heavy reads, they're only about anywhere between 11 and 30 pages, if you will. But the National Security Strategy of 2015 and the National Security Strategy of 2017 are starkly different when it comes to climate change. Under Obama, and there is not one for 16 because it was not developed, it was not written. Obviously the first year, a little bit focused for President Trump, but it just recently came out in December of 2017. Dating back to 2003, every president, regardless of side of the seats that they're on, had climate change in their national security strategy at some depth, some more than others. 2015, it's mentioned, clearly mentioned 14 times in the national security strategy and had a completely dedicated section on climate change and how it impacts military and military operations. Under the last presidency and under the last national security strategy, we had programs and initiatives that were moving at a very, very fast pace. Where we should have been going, where we should still be going when it is related to climate change. We also had chain of command emphasis. It came from the top. Like Dr. LaPuma mentioned, President Trump or former President Obama is the commander-in-chief. So we had the emphasis of the White House and every military leader in between to focus some effort. We can't focus all efforts on climate change, but it allows us to play it in our brain and use it as a planning factor and tool. Whereas now, under the 2017 strategy, there is no mention of the word climate change in the document, not one. It talks about global warming and environment, I believe energy and environment, and how we must foster a relationship, and that is more obviously focused from an oil perspective, which is a national strategy, security strategy implication, but it does not mention climate change at all in the document. Since 2017, now this document was also authored predominantly by Secretary of Defense General Mattis, retired. So, you know, here's a military guy writing the document, which he should, but obviously he is being informed and advised as to what his focus will be as the Secretary of Defense. And one of those is not climate change. So over the past year and a half, and moving forward, we've halted working groups, research, and focus. And I put up there a pause. I hope it's a pause. I hope that the military will get this back into the national security strategy so that we can continue to focus on it. And right now we have very, very minimal support to do anything new, innovative, or really put money towards the topic of climate change within the military. The Army operating concept. I'm going to shift focus here a little bit. Very, very busy slide. But what you see is you have maritime, you have space, you have air, cyberspace, land. That is the Army operating concept. It is a multi-domain battlefield is what we're calling it now within the military. It's not just force on force. You must take into consideration cyber and space. Currently, we are focusing on a 4+1 policy. And that 4 is Iran, Russia, North Korea, China. The +1 is terrorism. All right, so all our focus and energy from a military perspective is our focus on those 3 topics. Underneath the Army operating concept, what General Perkins, the former commander of the Training and Doctrine Command of the United States Army, his tagline is that the future is unknown and unknowable. And that can relate to anything, but it definitely relates to climate change. We don't know where we're going. We have numbers and data out there that can help us get to or focus on targets and goals. But is it truly going to happen the way that we're trying to think it's going to happen for 2025, 2050? We don't really know. The Army operating concept is a chance to break free from the mind meld. Okay, we've been doing this in the military this way for 50 years. We're going to continue to do this for another 50 years. This concept allows us to think differently. And it hopefully will empower some of our forces out there, our forces, and I say from the Training and Doctrine Command, or even under the soon-to-be Army Futures Command, and allow them to think about what's going to happen in 2025. What is this region going to look like? What is that region going to look like? Do we need to be worried about installation forces or installations in Alaska? Absolutely. Permafrost. You know, what are we thinking about? So hopefully this Futures Command will allow us to change our focus, take it out of a day-to-day operations from our fighters and ground pounders that are out there, from the different combatant commands, and place it into a command that is really thinking out forward. Now the military and climate change are related because, can be related in another fashion, and that's on what we call the POM, and it's basically our budget. And our budget is in 4-year cycles. So we know that we can't change this tomorrow in the Army, but what we can focus on is 4 years out. So that pairs nicely with climate change, where we don't have to start thinking about climate change effects now. We need to start thinking about climate change effects a few years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. What Army Futures Command and the Army Operating Concept lack is, again, any mention of climate change or future impacts. So we do need, as a military, need to bring a section into Futures Command and into the Army concept, or Army Operating Concept to build, so that there is a piece, an individual, a team, a working group that focuses on climate change and how that impacts our military, our forces, soldiers, sailors, Air Force, and Marines, Airmen and Marines. So what is war? Merriam-Webster defines war as hostile conflict between states or nations. And the Department of Defense always has a legal jargon a little bit more deep and uses some colorful words. But if you focus on the bottom, it's a state's right under international law to vindicate one side or the other. Now, if there's any historians out there or theorists, Karl von Clausewitz is a Prussian theorist from the 18th century. And basically, he is the god of military doctrine. He set things in motion for how we kind of operate where we are now and how we've come along. Continuation of politics. So is climate change a continuation of politics? Currently, right now, I guess it could be. It's a lack of politics or support of politics. Dr. Lukuma uses or mentioned a tagline, is that the environment was never intended to be a military arm or a military arm of politics. And I think I got that wrong. I'll have to go back and do that. So I just said all that. But Clausewitz's relationship of war is defined by people, army, and government. And it's a balancing act of those. It's like taking 3 magnets and a metal object from the top and trying to get it to balance perfectly. One is always pulling the other out of the way. So that metal object is always in flux. And that's where we are with climate change and how it impacts people. People that have no air conditioning and are hot are going to get cranky. People that don't have access to water are going to get cranky. Government's purpose and lack of use or support of natural resources is going to influence how their people live on a day-to-day basis. So throughout history, Clausewitz mentions that the nature of war does not change. It's violent, it's interactive, and it's political. What changes is the character of war. And character of war is what's happening in the real world. Character of war is influenced by technology, law, ethics, culture, social, political, and military organizations. What's missing from this? Climate change? Climate change is missing. If technology, ethics, culture, those things, social media, they impact or have the potential to impact war. Does not climate change? Climate change can cause conflict. So, drought, flooding, food scarcity, mass forced migration, infectious diseases, Arctic melt, extreme heat. All of these climate change effects impact society, but they also impact how military operations are going to have to, or are going to be influenced by climate change and the society that they are supporting. And I'm going to tie these two together when I talked about the combatant command regions. And you'll see what our regions have to think about when it comes to climate change. Will climate change cause war by itself? Not likely. Okay. Conflict is started by unhappy populations, poor government policies and resource management, economic disparities, have and have not. Those that have air conditioners, those who do not, those who have electricity, those who do not, lack of employment and or farming. We can tie these things, like these 4 topics here, to the Arab Spring. Okay? The Arab Spring, drought within Syria region. By the way, so people who could no longer farm moved to the cities. Cities didn't have the infrastructure to support. Oh, by the way, the government policies and resource management were mismanaging what they did have, and the ability to bring in from China, Russia, rice, wheat as an import. Oh, by the way, they were having their drought as well, so their prices skyrocketed, and they were no longer, the Syrian government was no longer, had the ability to purchase those items. So what happens when you have a pissed-off population with no jobs, with a government that's failing, and you have a society that has haves and have-nots? You have the Arab Spring. You have a war that is brewing, that is being bolstered by things that are, everybody needs to have basic needs, but when they don't have it, they get upset. So conflict will not necessarily cause a war, but it is a threat multiplier. It is a catalyst to war. And if we as a military don't pay attention to those things within our regions, I'll share here in a couple seconds, then we are going to be remiss, and those combatant commanders around the globe are going to have pockets of instant fires that they're going to have to put out. And unfortunately, that's how we are thinking about climate change from a military perspective. It's after the fact and when they happen, instead of trying to predict, work with countries and other militaries to maybe potentially improve climate change effects and be a part of the solution versus being part of being ignorant to the issue. So as you can see in this slight depiction, resources and population imbalance. Then we have excessive consumption, and environmental change leads to scarcity. And then there's competition internally in the one country or across borders, which leads to a small conflict. And then you get institutional breakdown by governmental agencies and policies, which then seem to blow out of control into a violent conflict. And it's basically a non-stop loop after it hits violent conflict. So I talked briefly about the combatant command regions of responsibility. And we have NORTHCOM, Northern Command, Southern Command, Africa Command, CENTCOM, Central Command, which is what everybody really hears on a day-to-day basis, Afghanistan and Iraq, European Command, and then the Pacific Command. These combatant commands are led by 4-star general officers, Army, Navy, Air Force mix, but obviously their responsibilities are extremely vast. Where does climate change fall into the CENTCOM commander's brain? Probably not at the very tipping point. Okay, it's there. He or she probably hears more about climate change on the news than he does from his military planners and supporters. And that's where we need to have somebody at least being part of the decision-making process and planning process, so that when another Arab Spring or when we lose an island because of sea level rise, that's going to have an impact within his or her region, one way or another, whether it's a peaceful transition and solution, or whether it's through a violent conflict. So instead of discussing, each is within the combatant commands, I was able to find a quick video, and I think it sums up pretty well what, just the kind of top 12 epicenters of climate change issues around the globe, and you can see how they're going to cover the entire globe. And that means each one of these combatant commanders are going to have to deal with the effects of those climate change issues. So, see if I can do this. Don't worry about the music. It's just elevator music. So I think it's a very simplistic overview, which has pretty impactful visual effects of how, if you could overlay those 12 epicenters on top of our combatant command regions, there's not one combatant commander across the Department of Defense that does not have a climate change issue within his or her footprint. And that's just one or two or three in those. The laundry list is large. Some of the trends of the past and what we've seen so far is that 50% of the conflicts over the past 20 years are reconflicts. They're not new conflicts. They're thousands of year-old conflicts. Look at Iraq. Anything in the Middle East right now, it's not new. It's thousands of years old. There's a relationship between climate change and violence that can be dated back to 12,000 years of human history and conflict. The Department of Defense is not going to solve climate change, but we can be a driving force to help to assist in solving climate change, if you will, or helping the numbers, reduce the numbers. We have a lot to look at from the military point of view. A tank uses a lot of fossil fuel, a lot of fuel. Are there means to get, a 60-ton tank across a desert utilizing solar panels at the same rate of speed with the same impact that it has? Don't know. We're not there yet, but we should be looking at that because that's what we do. We should be good stewards of our natural resources. We're one of the major agencies or entities that are at fault right now because we use so much. Our batteries in our vehicles, in our communication devices. Can they be used with solar panel? I don't know. Well, yes, they can. But to get it on the back of a guy that's already carrying 70 pounds of equipment, he would definitely like to have lighter batteries. So if we can find a way to charge his radio and his man pack versus carrying excess batteries, we need to do so. However, the DoD is not prepared, not trained, and not funded to support the effects of climate change right now. Our military is exhausted, and they're exhausted from fighting, a war is the longest war that we've fought so far. Multiple deployments, and 2, 3, 4, 5 deployments. No end in sight within Afghanistan. So, we're not only tired from that aspect, but we're also tired from the aspect of humanitarian and disaster assistance. Floods, Katrina, Rita, national forest fires here at Homeland. Okay, there's potential for other items in the Caribbean and South America. You name it, the Pacific, with sea level rise. We're assisting in those, but we're not funded for those. We're not supposed to be doing that. But as Dr. LaPuma says, it's an action, and we are actors. Somebody says go, we go, and we're there to help and support. But we could be better trained, better supported, and definitely better prepared to support in climate change events than we are right now. Our Commander-in-Chief, General Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of the Army, his number one priority is about readiness. Yet I believe that we're not quite ready when it comes to supporting, to respond effectively to climate change-induced conflicts. We're not there yet because it doesn't have the focus. It slowly picked up momentum up until 2015, but now it's been turned off. So I said earlier that it's kind of at a pause. And I believe that the military is smart enough to understand that we're at a pause. And we can pick this momentum back up, but we're losing time, we're losing energy, we are losing momentum, and we're losing the ability to keep things moving or at the fast pace that we need it to happen. Most importantly, our current Department of Defense policy or strategy lacks significant emphasis and funding to properly prepare in support of climate change effects. So for the future, wars of the 21st century, in my eyes, are are not going to be fought over something, or will be fought over something different. It'll be over climate change and the shortages and devastating impacts that will come from it. Climate change is a national security issue, home and abroad, and we must place focus and support on it. We must anticipate changes, posture forces, and most importantly, develop capabilities to mitigate the threats caused by climate change. We have the ability to do so. We have the knowledge. We just need the support and emphasis and some funding in order to make this happen. The United States and the Department of Defense must set the stage for climate change, and we have to work with our foreign governments. We have to work with our foreign militaries in support of climate change impacts. And then we need to require, fund, and support the combatant commands to study the challenges within each one of their regions. Because the list is lengthy within CENTCOM, within AFRICOM. I mean, I can just imagine what's going through your head about what you think of Africa, and you can probably think of 5 or 6 impacts of climate change. You think of Central Command in Southwest Asia, you can think of 5 or 6 implications of climate change. So with that, that's really all I had. I would like to acknowledge publicly Dr. Laguma's support over the past year. Jennifer's support from an administrative side. She gets me set up. She helped me get this through today. She helped me get my classes. The GW Writing Center, up until, sadly enough to say, and I'm in a world of academia, I have not written a paper of this length my entire career. And I struggled, I was scared, and I was very thankful for the GW Writing Center. They are a very, very powerful tool to be able to get in and just have somebody else to look at it. But you know, the Army, we think short and sweet, to the point. Oh, by the way, there's no plagiarism in the Army, so that's something that I'm not used to by any means. But it was an enlightening experience, a broadening experience over the past year being here, just sitting in classes of environmental nature that helped retweak my brain to get me back into the technical world where I'm about to take command this summer. It was just it was perfect timing for me professionally, personally with my family, and the ability to sit in class with some great individuals, some broad thinkers out there, and you know, it's been a great year. So, sir, thank you very much, Dr. Graves. I was talking to Dr. Laguma about your tag team class over the semester and how wonderful it's been. So thank you very much.
Oh, you forgot your family.
Oh yeah, my family. I don't think my wife, she's enjoying Germany right now. I may see her in, I guess, July. So I think that's the next trip that we have planned is a cruise to Croatia and the Greek islands. But we are leaving the kids at home. So thank you. I'll take your questions.